So I think we can get started then, right?
Yes, definitely. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Said Peñaranda, and for those who do not know me, let me kindly introduce myself. I am currently working at Democracy International as an intern, and I am helping the team to co-organize and co-host these virtual workshops. Overall, I truly hope that this will be an enriching session for all of you in order to get to know the proposal that will be brought to the fore today, which is the United Nations Global Citizens Assembly. Before we get started, just some recommendations for our participants. First of all, please respect each other when it comes to different opinions in the chat or when you're also speaking. Likewise, we ask you to kindly mute yourself when you're not talking. Also to raise your hand when you want to have the word and intervene. Zoom has a function for this, so you can just use it right away. And finally, the webinar will be recorded and publish it at a later stage on our social media. So in case you want to remain anonymous, feel free to switch off the camera and or change your name on screen. So now, before we get officially started, I would like to explain who we are. Democracy International is a NGO based in Cologne, Germany, and our cornerstone or main objective is to work towards direct democracy, transparency, and human rights related topics and causes, not just within Germany, but across the whole world. And in order to comply with these purposes, we are naturally constantly relying on our partners, just as we are doing right now, as this is a joint initiative of Democracy International, Democracy Without Borders, and Civicus. That being said, let me bring to the fore the specific topic that gathers us around today. And it is basically the United Nations Global Citizens Assembly, as I just mentioned before. This proposal comes into being within the context of a campaign we are supporting called We the Peoples. And simply put, We the Peoples as a project strives to make global governance a more inclusive and plural arena in which we can, as normal citizens, we can have a say at the transnational level. And this is important, as you already know, that humanity is encountering and facing a lot of issues and challenges that demand that we work in a jointly way and that we collaborate and cooperate among us. Because of this, the main organization we are aiming at in order to exert some or to trying to get those structural changes is the United Nations. We believe that there's definitely a need for restructuring the UN and make it a more accessible forum for citizens. In this session, we have held so far 3 online workshops in which we have featured some of those concrete ideas supported by the We the People's campaign. The first of these workshops was on the topic, the United Nations World Citizens Initiative, which basically enables people to put forward proposals on key issues at the highest political level. Then we presented our second idea, which is the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, that allows for the inclusion of elected representatives in the agenda setting and decision-making process of the UN. And 14 days ago, we presented our last proposal or idea, which is was the United Nations Civil Society Envoy. So today, once again, we will be presenting the UN World Citizens Initiative. Because of this, I am happy to announce that 3 experts on this topic have joined us today to discuss the UN World Citizens Assembly. And first of all, we have Sanskriti Menon from the Center of Environmental Education in Pune, India, who facilitates the India cluster. Likewise, we have with us Fatima Samba from the School of Collective Intelligence in Morocco, and she facilitates the Francophone cluster. And last but not least, we have John Stever from the Innovation for Policy Foundation, a Pan-African organization, and basically he coordinates the central circle. So Sanskriti, Fatima, John, thank you for joining us. And finally, as you already know, in order to get you more familiarized with the UN World Citizens Initiative, we already sent you three challenges ahead in which you were asked some specific questions on this topic. We thank you for your proactiveness and your inputs. And in fact, we will be sharing and we will be running a poll to know who of you did take part on these challenges. If you did not, it's completely okay. But for those who participated, thank you so much for that. So after this introduction, we can finally get started. For this, my colleague Caroline Van Eilen, who is the responsible for Democracy International's public relations and global community building, will take over. So Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Said. And as you see that we've been joined so numerously by the people from the Global Assembly, and we of course want to hear from them. I will try and keep it really, really short this time. Unfortunately, I also see that we're having a technical difficulty, so we won't be running a poll, but I can tell you that I think 11 people participated in the poll this time. And so I'm just going to share the responses that we got really quickly. I hope you can all see my screen. Let's move over there now. Okay, so you were asked at first to think about why it is important to decentralize policymaking and how a citizens' assembly can help that. A lot of you responded, and concerns that seems to recur are increasing diversity, making sure that participation runs through all layers of society. To help talk about different kinds of topics. So a second question that you were asked to address is what the potential stumbling blocks are that a UN Global Citizens Assembly would face. So not just a Global Assembly on climate change, but also a permanent tool that would work as a randomly selected Citizens Assembly at the UN level. I think that if we want to sum it up, the main concern, and this is something that's been coming back in every webinar we've had so far, is that of course the world is made up of states that are more democratic and states that are less democratic. And so how can we guarantee participation of people who live in states who are less democratic? Another recurring issue that we've talked about is who are citizens? What do we do to ensure that stateless people have a voice and that they are heard? And so I think these are also very exciting questions that we can discuss later during the debate. And then finally, we've asked you to think about what a sortition process for a Global Citizens Assembly could look like. And someone has described very detailedly the actual sortition process for the Global Assembly that will happen alongside the climate conference in Glasgow, and that we will hear more of. Other people have pointed out that sortition has to adhere to some level to the rules of the nation where participants take part from. And so this, of course, raises also certain difficulty that we can look at in our debate. And I will really leave it there so that we can focus on the actual debate that we will all have together live here. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Caroline. So, well, right now, we will have our experts presenting the UN Global Citizens Assembly so that we can understand what it is all about. Perfect. So we can get started. I mean, John Sanskriti, Fatima, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It is such a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. So before giving you more details about the Global Assembly, I would like to start by putting more emphasis on our guiding mission, which is to really give everyone a seat at the global governance table. What do we mean by everyone? Are we talking about the people with the loudest voices, people who are experts and technocrats? No, we're talking about ordinary citizens from all layers of society. Now, why do we think that it is crucial to have these people and give them the chance to speak up? Well, we believe that nobody knows how the shoe feels, but the people wearing that shoe, not the designer of the shoe, not the maker of the shoe, but the one wearing it. So that is to say that only citizens know their true needs. We just realized that there's this huge gap at the global governance table. There's this huge missing puzzle. And that puzzle is me, you, us, our voices. And this is why we're building this global assembly. We're really gathering people from all around the world. We're going to listen to each other, talk to each other, try to build something together. We want to prove to the world that citizens are this huge, vast have this huge mine of knowledge and expertise and unbounded wisdom that politicians need to tap into. Now, having this mission in mind, our values are John, can you please get back to the previous slides? Now, having this mission in mind, our core value is that we're not really focusing on the ends, but we're focusing on the process. We're not here looking for solutions. We're not here looking for the outcome and the output. We're here trying to come up with new ways, better ways of generating solutions together. We're not really seeking to impose our views on anyone, but we are rather trying to create a platform for people to think, talk, listen, co-create, and act together. Can you please move the slide? We're having some technical issues here. Sorry about that. So our main vision is to really build this permanent structure. We believe that the Global Assembly is more than one event. We are aware that the global issues require collective global decisions and solutions, and therefore we are trying to make the Global Assembly a permanent part of international decision-making. We want to make the Global Assembly a permanent part that exists alongside with other initiatives that are also striving for the same objective as we are. 2021 is our launch year. As far as we know, the Global Assembly is the first of its kind. So this year we are holding a 100-person assembly with a view to scaling it up in the future. As we emphasize in our values, we know that we don't really have all of the answers. So we're really engaging in an open process of piloting and learning with global partners and citizens all around the world. Citizens just like you. I'm going to pass it on right now to John, who will walk you through the components of the Global Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fatima. So we've heard a little bit about the why. This is our North Star. What are we trying to achieve? What are we doing this all for? I'm going to talk a little bit about the what. So I think many of us, when we think about a global assembly, we're thinking about what we call the core assembly. This is the 100-person descriptively representative body that's going to be selected through a process of sortition, otherwise called a civic lottery. And we're going to be bringing people together that are descriptively representative about location, around gender, educational levels, which is essentially our proxy for socioeconomic status. And then importantly, we're also going to be stratifying our sortition to ensure that we're representative in terms of people's perspectives on the climate emergency. So this is the 100-person assembly. This is what we call the core assembly. This is just one piece of this year's global assembly. The second is what we call the community assemblies. And so precisely for some of the reasons that were shared in the poll from Democracy International, 100 people, it's difficult to represent the global population. And it's really our vision, as Fatima was sharing, to really create an opportunity for all people to have a voice in global decision-making. And so for this reason, we've created a directly democratic opportunity for people to be able to participate in this process. We call this community assemblies. We basically designed a DIY toolkit so that communities around the world, whether that's companies, whether that's community spaces like libraries, youth centers, whether that's municipal governments, cities, states, governments at a national and regional level, the idea is that this DIY toolkit can be appropriated and participants can walk through the same kind of learning journey as the participants in the core assembly and be able to input into the final report that will be submitted both to COP and then next year in Stockholm Plus 50, which my colleague Sanskriti will share a bit more about in terms of docking. So then the third piece of the Global Assembly this year is what we're calling the cultural wave. This is an opportunity for people not just to share their inputs in a sort of a structured deliberation, but also to be able to react to it with cultural and creative inputs. It's about activating artists, painters, poets all around the world to be able to talk about global deliberations, talk about reimagining governance, to talk about the climate and ecological crisis. And so we're launching a platform to be able to receive this content from artists and content creators all around the world. And I think what many of us have commented on in the survey earlier, and what many people are concerned about in this call, it seems like, is the sort of sortition process. And so we've designed a 4-step process. Oftentimes, national assemblies that are sort of organized, or local assemblies that are organized through a sortition process, use some form of a sort of database, a civic database around like a voter registry or social security data or something like this to be able to identify people. That's clearly not possible at the global level. So what we've done is we've first started out by using a NASA database of population density overlaid on top of a rasterized model of Earth. And we've essentially randomly selected people and identified locations where they live. So we've looked at over 7.5 billion people. We've chosen points where they live. So that was the first step. Where are the people that we're going to be recruiting? The second step is that we're building up a local community host network. So working with local organizations all around the world to be able to recruit these participants. The third step is that we're recruiting between 4 and 6 participants at each location, and some locations even more. And then the final step, step 4, is that we're going to organize a global participant lottery. So we basically take this group of roughly 500 candidate participants from around the world, and then we're going to essentially do a random selection of those alongside these demographic characteristics that I mentioned before to be able to identify the final 100 members of this year's assembly. And I will show this beautiful map that indicates where each of the points are, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Sanskriti to talk a little bit about how we're going to be doing this and what we've been up to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And yeah, I want to share with you where we are in the process and what to expect in the next 3 to 4 months. And as John said, see, I'm a cluster lead. I'm part of the infrastructure that is being created. And what we are now trying to do, as John mentioned also, is to bring on community hosts and onboard them for each of these locations on the map. And the role of the community hosts is actually to support the actual 100 participants who will be recruited also using Civic Lottery. And I just want to share with you that we are, of course, encountering some challenges because you can see there are 18 points in India and similarly 18 in China and several spread across the globe. And some of these locations are in remote places. And in India, it's the monsoon season. Locations are experiencing extreme events and flooding as we speak. And the ask is not small because we are asking people to contribute, I mean, almost 70 hours. And perhaps at odd times of the day with an unknown person who, you know, as their host, who they may not know, and using technology that they have not experienced before. But I think these challenges are actually, they underline why we need the Global Assembly and why it is important. It's really so that people with and despite these constraints can have a seat at the global governance table. We've been preparing through lab processes in July and August to be at this moment in time. And, it's been moving because we could also sense the pride and the need that, the pilot processes that we did of having people sharing their own experienced ground realities and learning from and contributing to the discussion. And so that was part of the preparations over the last few weeks and a couple of months, which brings us really to the present time. And in September now, we are onboarding the hosts at these sites, and then as we speak, starting to recruit the potential assembly participants. And then, in October, that is prior to the COP, or the pre-conference of parties month, the idea is that the core global assembly process would, the assembly participants would understand the current situation of the climate and ecological crisis in languages and formats that are understandable, whether it's audio or visual or text, and locally contextualized with the help of the community hosts, so that people can access and understand this material. And they draw on the available science, which is available to us. And they address the core framing question, which is right on top of the slide, which is that how can humanity address the climate and ecological crisis in a fair and effective way? Sorry, I just want to go back. Yeah, no, sorry. This remote access, yeah. And through November, which is during the COP, the idea would be to prior to the COP is really to develop the principles that we think ought to guide discussions at the Conference of Parties. And while the COP is in session, the Global Assembly would submit its recommendations to the COP, and we have 2 or 3 times that we are able to intervene with the COP. And we would also be observing the COP. And then in December, after the COP, we would be able to review how the COP has gone and what commitments have been made. And based on that, we are able to then go forward to do the future agenda setting. And so that's what we have in the next 3 months. And the idea is that through this whole year, we've been working hard to really create this new infrastructure for getting people, ordinary citizens from around the world, from our planet, onto this decision making. And joining and supporting us in this endeavor is really the UN and the COP, and also the UK government and the Scottish government. And we really would like to invite you to join us. I think we have very similar objectives of really, it's really nice. I think it's a great connection of we the people, and there's opportunities to be facilitators, volunteers, and note takers. There's the art events, and there's the possibility of the local community assembly that can be organized and join into the core assembly that we'll be having. So so that's what I wanted to share of how it's all going on. And I'd like to now hand it back to you, Caroline.
Thank you. I think we will go then to a quick Q&A. Maybe we can stop. Yes.
Yes. Definitely. Now we would like, all of the attendees that want to raise any questions or want to have any doubt in regards to regarding to what was explained by our experts, you can definitely raise your hand. We already have some comments on the chat. For example, Thorsten states that big countries as Australia and Russia are missing. And I also can see that Ina is raising her hand. So Ina, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Said. Indeed, I'm speaking here on behalf of School of Civic Education. We are one of the oldest Russian NGOs, and I actually had 2 questions. First of all, Russia indeed is not also covered on this map. And we have to understand due to the recent developments, the dome over Russia will be only thickening because both sovereign democracy and sovereign internet are on the agenda of our government. But despite that, we have to understand that there is a huge network of people being active in Russia. Those are ordinary and not so ordinary citizens, and they feel themselves as citizens of the global world. And our school, for the past almost 30 years, have been working on particularly this aim to make the citizens of Russia feel part of the global world, understand how the world is organized, and to feel responsible for their local communities, at the same time to be a part of a global community. So my question is how flexible the recruitment of the local organization that can be a part, hosts of the network, how is it going to happen? And second, because we cannot be legally represented in Russia any longer due to the reasons I just mentioned, but it means that we keep being in touch with the network of our alumni. And we would definitely want to distribute this information among them, and we would want to be a part of this recruitment process. And I think we are the right peoples to do so. So we probably need your help to maybe speak at our seminars, because we continue to do so online, offline. So we'll really need a hand here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina, for that contribution. So I would like to invite any of our experts to come and shed some light on these questions.
So maybe I can jump in and talk a little bit about the sortition methodology that Torsten was encouraging us to go into a little bit deeper. First of all, I just want to correct, it's difficult with that map because we're looking at the map of the world kind of zoomed out on a PowerPoint presentation. But it's actually, Russia was actually, there are 2 points in Russia that were selected through the global lottery. There's a point in Eastern Moscow and there's a point in Krasnodar. And we are in the process of recruiting community hosts. And I think I'd love for Sanskriti or Fatima to share a little bit about how that process is, because we'd love to put you in touch with one of our colleagues from G1000 who's leading that cluster. Regarding the question about the sortition process, with 193 member states, it's clearly not going to be possible to represent all of them with 100 assembly members selected through random selection. The other, when we look at the sort of random selection globally, there's 7.5 billion people. There's only about 30 countries with more than 1% of the world population. Right, so we're talking about the majority of the locations are actually taken by larger countries, and you'll see that we have 18 points from both China and India, which is what you would expect because they represent collectively more than 1/3 of the world population. So as a result of this, it's not really we're not really expecting that we would even have 100 countries represented out of the 193 member states through this process of random selection. I don't know if that answers any of your questions. I don't know if Sanskriti, if that's maybe you guys want to jump in about how people can get involved as a host.
Yes, I think it's really nice. Wanting to be involved, it's absolutely welcome. We've been reaching out and broadcasting this information and into networks to say that it would be great to join in as a community host. If you are close to the point, we are looking at potential host organizations that are within a 200-kilometer radius around the point on the map. And there are certain, needs that you would have as a community host to be able to speak both English and the participants' language. The tasks are really to be able to go out and do the the interviews with the sort of a representative set of from the local community, and then of course run the civic lottery for being able to select the participant there. The next ask is really to translate the materials into formats that the participant would be able to understand. So in my case in India, we are really looking at several different languages, and we are also looking at audio recordings with visuals, because literacy might be a concern in certain limited in certain locations, and then really facilitate through the 70 hours that the assembly would be meeting. And so that would be in slots of about 2.5 to 3 hours, and you would accompany, the host would accompany the participant using techniques like the technologies of Zoom and Miro board or some collaborative software, and so the ability and connectivity and devices. And I know that in India there are some locations that may not have high-speed internet, so we have to really figure out what happens with the logistics there. But so if if all these conditions are sort of met, then it's possible to really be engaged as a community host. And and the cluster lead would then have a discussion with you and see how best to bring you on board. Does that explain, John? And you want to add something, Fatima?
No, you've explained it perfectly. I just want to add that you can also join as a community, as a member of the community of practice. You can help the organization near you that was selected as a lead with the contextualization, with the translation. That would be awesome if you could join.
Thank you, Fatima, also for those insights in Sanskrit as well. We also have another question on the chat, in fact, from Mark. He states, post COP26 would be the global assembly, post COP26, would the global assembly be able to take issues to a new UN Parliamentary Assembly for further discussion? I don't know if our experts want to react on this comment.
I could just say maybe, why not? I think that there are some well-known, challenges with different forms of, decision making, and it's quite well known that this sort of authorship bias, is sometimes called, when you bring groups of people together to draft legislation, and the idea of having multiple organizations sort of reviewing that. Of course, I think it's really important to understand what's the legitimacy of the organizations that are then reviewing this, but yeah, it's absolutely something worth considering. And I think that's something that's really important that was embedded in what Fatima was saying about this being a piloting year, which is that, we're really trying to learn and explore and pilot. And, this is something that's, as far as we're aware, has never been done before. And so we know that we're going to, identify a lot of opportunities for improvement. And we're not really stuck to any one particular methodology here. It's really about what works best and how we can best support the voices of ordinary people to engage in global decisions.
Thank you so much, John. I also can see, there's a hand raised from Jessate. You can go ahead.
Yes, unmute first, yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this fascinating initiative and the introductions you made. I have 4 questions, 2 relating to this assembly at COP26 and after, and the other 2, if this is meant to be a permanent structure, then as it relates to the United Nations and its member states. So on COP26, I just wanted to ask, will this be ready for COP26, this whole deliberation process, and will this actually happen prior to that? I know that you gave a timetable, but just would like to know, I saw on the website that things depend on funds becoming available or not, etc. So I just would like to hear a confirmation or not. And second, that who makes the final report and what you hope will happen to it, since it is scheduled for March next year, so like 4 months after the COP26. And I hope you keep up with the number of questions. And then generally, as it relates to the UN, do you have governments and United Nations bodies which officially support this initiative to happen? And the last question is that what would motivate hesitant governments to give away substantial power to this citizens' assembly if and when it happens? Thank you.
Thank you, Geza. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, perfect, perfect.
So as far as I know, and the way we are all working very hard, I think we are going to be able to make our timetable. And our funding, thankfully, has also arrived. And we are reinforcing that we go with the timetable. So yes, unless something really drastic happens, we will stick with the timetable. John, you want to take on the question about the UN and what happens later? Maybe also the question about the report, who's preparing the report? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sanskriti. Thanks, Geza, for the questions. Yeah, so regarding the docking at COP, so I think this is really important, and it's something, it relates also to your final question about why are governments going to cede power to this. And I think it's really important to, first of all, recognize that this is what John Gaventa would call a claimed space, where we're bringing organizations, at this point, more than 100 organizations from around the world, from more than 50 countries together to be able to organize this activity. And so what we've done, which is somewhat different from some of the national and subnational assemblies that some of you might be familiar with, is that we're not just preparing the recommendations and submitting them to a government authority, in this case, the COP. As we saw with the Convention Citoyenne, you prepare a report, it's submitted to Macron, in the case of the UK, submitted to the Parliament. And what we're working on is actually an opportunity for the citizens, the assembly members, because actually this speaks to a previous point about citizenship, which is not a requirement for someone to become an assembly member. But the idea is that the members of the assembly will deliberate before COP, they'll share their recommendations to COP, and these recommendations will very much be at the level of vision and principles. As the modern philosopher Martha Nussbaum says, the cosmic city is a moral space, and the idea is to really occupy that moral space with legitimate voices from people all over the world. And so the idea is to bring this vision and principles, these recommendations to COP, and we have 3 opportunities at this point to be able to present those in green and blue zone events at the COP. And then the idea is that the participants of the assembly, the members, will actually observe COP. So they have scheduled about 8 hours for them to, in a staggered procession, basically observe different sessions of COP, to actually present at COP. And then the idea is that after the COP, they will continue deliberating about the recommendations that they submitted, but then having the experience of witnessing how those recommendations were received as a form of as a part of their learning journey. And to be able to see, okay, what did governments actually do with these recommendations? And they will continue deliberating. And the idea is actually to work with governments to come before the Global Assembly members to be able to present, what commitments did they make at COP with these principles and vision of the global citizenry in mind. So I don't know if that answers your question. Related to the very specific question about collaboration with the UN, we are working with UNFCCC, as well as the British and Scottish governments. The Scottish government is also a funder. Nicola Sturgeon announced this herself at the Austria World Forum a few months ago.
Thank you so much, John, for that explanation, really enlightening. Now I would like to invite Erwin Meyer, who is the spokesperson for our partner organization, Mea Democratie. Basically, he will, in a 1-minute pitch, he will explain, or he will argue why this UN Global Citizens Assembly proposal is a good idea. So Erwin, the floor is yours.
I'm unmuted, yes. I have only 1 minute, so just 2 reasons for a global assembly. First is the world is getting more globalized in the last decades. If you look at the big problems we have, for example, the climate problem, but also trade treaties and disarmament, etc. So many questions can only be solved on the global level, but democracy is still organized on the national level or on a regional level. We have the EU, we have the United States, etc. But that's the reason why we have United Nations, but we don't have United People organizations and funded. And it's time to have United People's Organization at the same level as United Nations. The second reason why I'm so strongly in favor of partition and direct democracy instruments is democracy is not there for itself, for no reason. It has always be defended and it has always be to be fighted for. And now it's in big and it's endangered. It's not always as obvious as in Afghanistan. It can be a very slow process, but on a global level, we are losing democracy now. And autocratic and not anti-democratic power is getting stronger and stronger. And to my mind, the only way to defend is if we have more love and passion for democracy by the ordinary people. So to my mind, governments and parliaments are not strong enough to defend democracy against the enemies of democracy. It needs the engagement of ordinary people, but the passion and the love for democracy only comes with doing it. Democracy is nothing you're learning at school, and it's not history. It's having decisions every week, every month. You are strongly involved, then you love democracy. If you can make your own rules that are affecting your life. Therefore, we need a combination of citizen assemblies and direct democracy. So that's the reason I see.
Thank you.
It's more than 1 minute, so it's enough.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erwin. I think that your opinion as an expert on citizens' assembly is really valuable. And well, also, I forgot to mention that Erwin is one of our board members at Democracy International. So thank you for that, Erwin. Now, I would like to get started with the so-called Devil's Advocate session. I will try, as a sort of contrast, I will try to provide a statement in which I will try to pose a challenge for this, or I will put into doubt or in doubt this proposal. So any of our experts can react on my comment, but basically, it is not a secret that we are facing a democratic deficit in which we struggle to get people truly involved in the decision-making process all over the world, as there's a lot of red tape, as we can see, for example, in the United Nations. So my question would be, how can we, through this Global Citizens Assembly, effectively tackle this issue down? This democratic deficit, if decisions if those recommendations that citizens will provide are not binding, but for the policymakers. So wouldn't we probably wasting our efforts? That's my question. Not to mention that I support the proposal. It's just like an exercise that we want to perform. So yeah, any of our experts can react, or maybe someone from the public wants to react on this, you can go ahead. In fact, I think that there was a question or comment on our chat from Christoph that relates somehow to this. He states, the plan is interesting indeed. However, what makes you so convinced that you will be heard by different national governments? A plan for 3 months is not enough. And how can you bring 196 countries to find global solutions for global problems as climate change, health, and environment? So I would like to invite any of our experts to jump in and maybe react on these comments.
All right, so I can jump in. I think each of us have different really important perspectives to share about our understandings of the democratic deficit worldwide. Where I'm sitting, I often attribute it to the fact that people's voices aren't generally, they're not very meaningful. And that's a result of the fact that what we understand democracy to be is a very narrow understanding. the sort of French and American constitutions in the 17th century, like it was quite well known by many of the drafters that they were essentially entrenching the aristocracy, right, through this sort of electoral representative system. And so what we talk about when we talk about democracy is not actually, in fact, particularly democratic. And unfortunately, these days it's become quite fashionable, especially last year during COVID, to sort of compare, democracy versus, authoritarianism. And essentially what we're doing is often comparing elite democracy to elite authoritarianism, and we're not actually comparing the full range of opportunities when we talk about what democracy can be. And that's what we're trying to explore here. And I say that really humbly because, we're standing on the shoulders of thousands of years of thinking about this from every single culture across planet Earth, right? It's easy to sort of, point to, that cosmopolite was first shared by Diogenes, for example, but every single intellectual wisdom tradition on planet Earth has sort of dreamed about the idea of the cosmic human. And so we're trying to stand on the top of the shoulders of all of this together with brothers and sisters around the world to really imagine what global democracy could look like. And I think that it's important to sort of, it's obviously it's easy to criticize that this is non-binding, but we have to start somewhere, and we can't expect that we're going to sort of make a proposal as sort of united citizens around the world to all of a sudden have governments say we're going to do it. And this is why it's important to recognize that there are many different tactics. There are people that are looking at social change work from a variety of different perspectives. Some of those violent, some of those non-violent on the street, some of those about actually trying to create space and voice and understanding and love and representation. And so I think what we're offering here is an opportunity for people to see how decisions can be taken. And that's why we're working very hard as a team to be transparent with everything that we do, so that we can learn together within our team, but globally, because that's really who we see ourselves as serving, as everyone. We see ourselves at the service of everyone, and that reinforces that value that Fatima shared in the beginning, that we're focusing on the means, not the ends. We're not trying to presuppose the outcomes of an open process. But it's also the reason why when we're providing recommendations, we're not trying to take the people, oftentimes these deliberative assemblies will try and get citizens to talk directly about recommendations. You see this in the French Convention, for example. And one of the criticisms of that was that, the citizens hadn't had an opportunity to even think about what vision they were trying to achieve. Where are we trying to go? And it's, to quote Alice in Wonderland, it doesn't matter what road you take if you don't know where you're going. And so, what we're trying to do is actually create an opportunity for this global citizenry to come together and think about where do we want to go as humanity, to really deliberate about that, and then to reflect what kinds of principles then should guide that action, right? And so when we talk about principles, as Sanskriti introduced the framing question, we're really talking about two that we're offering for them to deliberate on. Of course, it's open for more to be introduced during the assembly itself, but we're really talking about fairness and effectiveness. And we see multiple dimensions of each of these. For example, when we talk about fairness, we're talking about intergenerational fairness. Who should bear the burden of this adaptation and this transition that is facing us? Is it us or future generations or 7 generations down the line? Or we're also talking about international fairness. Who should bear the brunt of this? The countries that are the historical emitters. We often, depending on when you look at the map of emissions, it looks like perhaps China is the leading emitter, but that's really only for the last 20, 30 years. Before that, it's quite clear that the historical emissions came from Western Europe and the United States. And so there are clear questions about, from an international perspective, what would be fair in terms of future emissions. And then there are also questions at a national level about fairness around equity. So that's just to give a little bit of a snapshot about the way that we're approaching this and why we think it's important, because we're not trying to force citizens into a box of recommendations that we're expecting governments to sort of linearly implement. We're really talking about guiding principles and values that we can create a foil for government action to be able to see our governments actually working in the interests of people. And that's why, again, we're not just delivering these to COP and walking away and saying, okay, we've done our work, now we've given some principles to COP. We're then going to continue deliberating amongst citizens and request governments to come back and share what they've done and how that's aligned with what citizens.
Thank you, John, for
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this information and this introduction for the Global Assembly. Yesterday, I wrote my application to the Global Assembly, and I'm interested to hear what you're going, how you will explain and how you will go on working. And here is my second question. We live from big distances from one to each other. So I'm asking myself, how can I contribute to the tasks we have to do? How can I do it in my country, or how can people do it, memberships of the Global Assembly, to work with you?
I don't know, Sanskriti, you want to take that? It really resonates with what you were sharing earlier with Inna.
Yes, I think there are several opportunities, because I think we do need this community of practice with people who've been thinking about democracy, who've been thinking about methods of deepening democracy to really sort out some of these questions. So it's not as though we have all the answers or even some of the answers. I think there's quite a lot of work to be done in reconstructing and reimagining what democracy would be in our times now. And I'm so glad you've written into the website. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanskriti, and also Christoph for your contribution. Also, I can see, well, there are a couple of comments in the chat. Darag says, if it's not binding, is it wasted? It's also a good rhetorical question. And also we have Johnny Carley, who says that values are the building blocks of cultures, and values express the intersections and divergences between cultures. It is possible to quantify values as a means of accounting for culture. The data eliminates the need for conjecture and assumption. What is in place to account for values development? Maybe, and there's another question from Gesate. Basically, he states, or he asks, what is the lower age limit for selection? How will children's interest be represented, and by whom? Maybe our experts, just before we conclude, can jump in to clarify a little bit about this topic or these questions.
Can talk a little bit about values, building on where the sort of presentation that I was offering just before. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Jacques Maritain. It was actually a conscientious decision to avoid talking about values and to focus on rights, because of course rights presuppose certain values, but he felt like there would be so much conflict between different cultures and countries around the discussion of these values that it would sort of delay the development of a sort of Universal Declaration of Rights. Rights are, values are absolutely, culturally dependent, which is the reason why it's so important to bring people together from every culture on earth, if we can, to be able to discuss them, and to be able to create good environment for deliberation and for discourse. So that's what we're trying to do. We've been working a lot in the design of the actual assembly itself. As Sanskriti was mentioning, we've been piloting through a series of labs over the summer what it actually looks like to have 5 different people from very different cultures and very different languages and very different sort of life experiences to come together and to share and to talk and to co-create together. And so we've been sort of building on these experiences, understanding how the consecutive translation in this case is going to work. We've been building up some nonverbals. We've developed hand signals for the nonverbal communication to make it easier for the participants to communicate directly to each other. Because of course, sometimes on these screens, it can become a bit impersonalized. But the idea is that we've been thinking about the actual discourse rules and the sort of structuring of the deliberation itself. And then we're going to be creating space in what Sanskriti presented earlier. It was block 3 for the members of the assembly to be able to really deliberate on these values and these principles. That answers your question. And if one of my colleagues wants to pick up on the second question, I don't know if I actually fully captured it.
Yeah, about the lower age limit. In fact, we have been discussing internally about whether there should be a minimum age, and I think so far the responses tend to be that we should not specify a minimum age. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts as well. And I think this discussion in the chat, I've been looking about the values. It would be interesting for me to understand a little more about the quantification of values. And I'm just trying to get my head around that. Maybe now is too short to understand that from you, Jeremy, but maybe there's another occasion to get into the details of it. But John, there's also this question about going forward with this permanent infrastructure, and Fatima, as you spoke about using this year's experience. And I think there's been tremendous amount of learning that we've had so far in terms of setting up the software, understanding about time zones, looking at how we create information materials, how can the information materials themselves not be biased, and how can they be culturally and locally adapted? How do we deal really with this very large diversity? And I think there's all this learning that would go into just adding on to creating the global infrastructure. But I think that itself is also something that we are discussing amongst ourselves, that how does this go forward? How do we do 1,000-person assembly, maybe even much larger assemblies in the future? But John, if you want to add to that as well, the learnings from this year already that we have and what goes forward into creating a more permanent infrastructure.
Yeah, I saw Fatima also coming off mute at the same time. I don't know if Fatima, you wanted to add something to that as well.
I just wanted to add something about what Sanskriti said about building this permanent structure that would support democracy worldwide. I had a short conversation with Caroline before the start of the session, and she told me that they're having a hard time inviting youth to these debates about politics and all. And I just thought that the Global Assembly is really an amazing opportunity for youth to speak up. We're going to be having 100 citizens from all around the world, from all layers of society, from different ages. So we're really hoping to reach out to the youth who are normally not interested in politics. It would be great to have them and speak up. This is my own perception as a young person myself. I think this is a great opportunity for me and for youth of my generation to finally have a say in our future, in the future of our planet.
Thank you, Fatima, for those amazing words. So yeah, basically, we are about to conclude. I don't know if any of our experts have anything else to add. But I think that so far the session has been really enlightening, and it is clear why we need to bring to the fore and to materialize such a proposal. So yeah, I wish that we could stay for more time debating, but good things have an ending. So that being said, I would like to thank to all the participants for attending to this webinar session. This was, as I mentioned before, a workshops series. This is the very last one, but we already had 3 other sessions in the past, and definitely this was a great way to conclude this amazing project that we have been leading with our colleagues from Democracy Without Borders and Civicus. I also want to thank, on behalf of Democracy International, to the GLS Treuhand organization or foundation for the financial support, which made this happen. And that being said, thank you once again to all of you. John, Fatima, and Sanskriti, thank you once again for your collaboration. And I hope all of you have an amazing day. Well, Sanskriti wants to say something. Yeah, you can go ahead.
I am so looking forward to having you as part of the community of practice. I hope you really seriously take the Join Us slide seriously, and it would be great to have your wisdom in this process. Yeah.
For sure. Thank you so much, Sanskriti. So that being said, once again, have an amazing rest of the day, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a great day.